Welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast, and others of you are joining us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Tonight, Black Anger. We, like you, are dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and are taking precautions. We are working with limited staff, and our guests are joining us remotely. We begin with an update on the COVID-19 pandemic, which has hit communities of color hard. President Trump and several in his administration have been infected, and cases are spiking. Dr. Cassandra Pierre, assistant professor of the Boston University School of Medicine and Boston Medical Center, joins us now with a reminder about ways to protect against the virus. Hello, Dr. Pierre.
Hey, good morning, Callie.
So we've said how critically important this is for communities of color. Remind us the safety protocols that are vital.
Absolutely. We have to make sure that we are committed to this. This is disproportionately affecting communities of color. It's important to continue to remember, wear your mask around others. It's as important for you as it is for others. Keep 6 feet apart, physically distance from others. That means not just people in bars or restaurants, but also at your job. People tend to downgrade their opinions of other people's risk the more like them they are. So even if you've known people for a long time, you've worked with them, you don't know what they're doing or who they're hanging out with. So continue to physically distance, wear your mask, don't let down your guard. Try not to go to large gatherings as much as possible, especially with people outside of your quarantine bubble. We continue to see people getting infected at barbecues, parties, and this is a marathon. I understand that we all want to get life back to normal, but we have to remember these principles. And obviously washing your hands is still important too.
All right, so culturally, we know that communities of color, Black folk, like to get together. You've just said these gatherings can be dangerous to our health. If it is possible to gather into the small groups as you've suggested, what should be happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously people are going to say the safest thing to do for the holidays, celebrations, is to celebrate within your quarantine group. But it's been months. We are all tired. We need some human connection. We need to see our families. We need to have our mom or dad's cooking. So I'm all about harm reduction. How can we make this as the least risky as possible? So the first step is, when you're thinking about a gathering, it has to be small. So think about your guest list. Should be 10 people or less, especially if it's an indoor gathering. So think about the people who are wearing their masks, physically distancing. If you don't really trust someone to not be out there at parties, not physically distancing, it might not be the best time to bring them into a small gathering setting. So that's one. And then the second thing is set the ground rules. If we are going to be making this safe, everyone has to follow the same recommendations. And the recommendations include, if possible, 7 to 10 days before the event, before you get together and hang out together, try as much as possible to stop socializing. Limit your social circle to the people in your quarantine bubble. It's not the time to go to a bar or restaurant. Again, as I mentioned, avoid the workroom if you can, because that's where a lot of the breakdowns happen. If you can't physically distance from people at your job while you're eating, maybe eat in your car. I know it sounds drastic, but it's important. And then the next step is actually pretty important, and that's get tested. A lot of us might not know where the closest place to get tested is, so please talk to your doctor or go onto the Massachusetts Department of Public Health website. They have a directory that tells you what the closest testing site is for you. Ideally, you would get tested twice. Once 1 week before the gathering, and the second would be 24 to 48 hours before you meet. And you have to look and see what the turnaround time of the testing in the place you're going to is. So it requires a little bit of work on your part to identify the place and then call them to see how quickly the test results come back, because you want the test results back before you meet.
Dr. Pierre, thank you so much. That's excellent advice. Thank you so much. Now to our main discussion. It has been a long summer. There have been ongoing street protests, more deaths of Black men, and no charges for the police officers involved in Breonna Taylor's death. All that against a backdrop of a health crisis, which has caused the highest rates of infection and death among people of color and forced many into unemployment. Black people are angry and are boldly voicing that anger. But black anger is threatening, and historically, black Americans have lost their lives and livelihoods for expressing their outrage. Tonight, understanding the origins of black anger and how we got here. Joining us, Kim McLaren, an associate professor and graduate program director of writing, literature, and publishing at Emerson College. Michael Jeffries, professor of American Studies and dean of academic affairs at Wellesley College. Renee Graham, associate editor and columnist for the Boston Globe's op-ed page. And Philip Martin, senior reporter, GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting. Welcome to all of you. Michael, I'm starting with you. Why is black anger threatening?
I really think that we have to look at this from an institutional perspective. It's not just that black folks are threatening to the social order when we're angry. Black folks are threatening to the social order, period, right? We are disciplined, penalized, cast as criminals, and otherwise degraded no matter what we do. So let's just make that clear first. It's not as if the criminalization of black life, the degradation of black life is based on black behavior. It's based on a social order that requires white supremacy in order to maintain itself. So that's the first thing. Second thing, if you want to understand why then black anger has become such a talking point, I really think it's important to look at the kind of propaganda and ideology of white supremacy, which casts black folks not only as a threat, but really as a sort of different category of being that is incapable of things like reason, logic, self-control, etc. So there's a long history of stereotyping where anger is attached to blackness, and that's intentional. This is not about black reaction or black behavior. This is about an institutional structure that criminalizes us no matter what we do and the accompanying stereotypes that it requires.
Renee, and you've talked about this being historically rooted in slavery, black anger.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at, I think Michael makes an interesting point when he talks about, the way that the logic of black anger is diminished. I mean, that's what the point is here. The idea is always, well, if you're angry, what are you angry about? And what they're really trying to do is diminish the issues that are fueling the anger. So if they can delegitimize your anger, then they're delegitimizing the issues. And this does go back for centuries and centuries. But again, as Michael made the point, it almost doesn't matter what black people do. Black joy was mocked in minstrel shows. Black anger is now threatening. Before the debate on Wednesday, Frank Luntz, who's a GOP pollster, said of Kamala Harris, I think she's got to figure out how to modulate herself to demonstrate why she's different, that she's preferable, and that she's not angry. He already put it out there before she uttered a word on the debate stage, this idea that somehow she has to prove to America that she's not another angry black woman. It's such an unwinnable kind of equation because no matter which way you go, the goalposts are always moved. So, if you say nothing, then the idea is that you're okay with it. And if you speak up, then you're even a bigger problem.
So some of the black anger that we've seen expressed over the summer is really boiled up as we've seen all of the street protests and really the atrocities, the more current atrocities, not to say they ever stopped. And I want to just give us a listen to, this is Breonna Taylor's aunt, because she spoke out after the decision was made by a Kentucky grand jury to not bring charges against the officers involved in her death. And here's what her aunt, Bianca Austin, had to say.
I was reassured Wednesday of why I have no faith in the legal system, in the police, in the law that are not made to protect us black and brown people. But when I speak on it, I'm considered an angry black woman. But know this, I am an angry black woman. I am not angry for the reasons that you would like me to be.
That's right.
But angry because our black women keep dying at the hands of police officers. And black men. Okay, angry because our children are dying at the hands of police officers. And I'm angry because this nation is learning that our black women dying at the hands of police officers, and this is not okay.
Kim, I want to get your response to that and address the angry black woman, angry black man trope.
Yeah, I mean, she's absolutely right. And everything that Michael and Renee have said. You know, in 1981, Audre Lorde wrote an essay called The Uses of Anger, in which she said all women have a well-stocked arsenal of anger that is potentially useful, right? I mean, and she's speaking about women in general, and she was speaking about Black women in particular. The sources of these angers are legitimate. Every thoughtful white person I know who has seriously considered and who has informed themselves of the history of white supremacy and slavery in this country has said to me, quote, I'm surprised you guys aren't more angry, right? So, I mean, this idea that Black anger somehow delegitimizes our demand for liberation is disingenuous. And we know, in fact, that anger in general is a very potent political tool. The Tea Party was spawned from anger, right? I mean, every white backlash that has greeted Black progress in this country has been spawned from white anger. So the notion that anger is somehow not a potent political force is only reserved for us. Now, the question is, how do we wield it? And also, there's political and racial and group anger, and then individual anger. But to say that Black anger is that angry, especially angry Black women, I mean, women, of course, get it from both sides, right? Is somehow delegitimate is simply a tool of control, which Michael and Renee have already said, right? It's just it's a tool of control, and I reject it. I mean, I'm not at all afraid of being labeled an angry Black woman. There's plenty to be angry about.
So, Philip, what we're talking about, the reason we're having this conversation in this moment is because we've heard those voices of Black anger a lot more bold, a lot more vocal, a lot more public, particularly among young people. You've been out there covering these street protests, and you've been around a while covering street protests. Have you seen that temperature go up?
Without question, Callie. All my colleagues here have summed it up very well, how anger has been weaponized by ideological opponents of Black progress. But you also see young people, and many older people for that matter, embracing their anger. You probably remember this movie, Charles Burnett, 1990, To Sleep with Anger, where vagabond Harry comes to visit Gideon. And it sort of gradually becomes clear that vagabond Harry is a predator. Well, you don't have that situation here now. People aren't sleeping with anger. They're awaking every single day to anger and going to bed with it true, and it's 24/7. And what you're finding is people have a lot to be angry about. And it's not just demonstrations, Callie, where you're seeing this anger come out. Of late, you're also seeing it when people realize the extent of voter suppression that is occurring right now, efforts to keep people from voting. Just the other day, the Wisconsin Appeals Court basically decided that they would not extend voting, absentee counting rather, in Wisconsin, the count of absentee votes. Thus, the possibility of several thousand people or tens of thousands of people being disenfranchised. And you're seeing this type of voter suppression, some of it certified, indemnified by courts across the country. And you see people are angry over this notion of the Proud Boys. I won't give them the credence of or the credit of seeing them anything more than a very noxious notion, but a very noxious, dangerous notion. And that is basically inspiring people, Black people, to go out and vote. I spoke to someone the other day, interviewed someone the other day, who said that he was not, in fact, interested in voting, pushed it off. I spoke with the same person in 2016. He's voting this year because he's angry. And he's taking his anger to the ballot box because of this assortment of issues that you've addressed, Callie, and that my colleagues have pointed out here.
Michael, Black folks have seen the boldness of the articulation right now is notable because Black folks have spent and do spend a lot of their lives suppressing the anger in order to function, in order to live. Really, it gets to be that threatening in some circumstances, and to have a livelihood. It becomes that critical. Speak to that, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The sort of day-to-day life as a black person in this country requires that kind of suppression or compartmentalization just to be able to get up and go do your job and interact with your colleagues, et cetera. We can't walk around in the workplace angry all the time. It wouldn't be a way to get anything done. But I think that what's happening now is in part because I think there are really two things at play here. Number one, I think we shouldn't underestimate the way that social media has stoked these flames, right? We know that the kind of bifurcation of the media that we consume into, there's kind of a right wing and then a left wing has sort of continued to feed and validate the intensity of the feelings that you're feeling on whatever side, right? Now, I'm not equating one side to the other, right? Because one side is dealing in reality, the reality of electoral theft, the reality of police violence, and the other side is dealing in fantasy largely. But nevertheless, right, this kind of individualized everyday anger has been affected by our devices and our communications. And then the second thing that I think we have to look at is the norm in terms of our political leadership and what kind of sentiment has been normalized in terms of the rhetoric of hate, the rhetoric of threat, of fear, of violence coming from the executive office of this country, right, sends a signal to the entire population, in particular those who continue to fan the flames of racism, that that's legitimate. So I think that when we look at one side of this, we have to really be able to look at the other side as well and understand that our political culture in general has become more accepting. And that can be productive and justified when we talk about anger on the left, but it's also quite dangerous when it comes to anger on the right.
And we saw a display of suppression of anger, I believe, in the vice presidential debate, Kim, with Kamala Harris, where she was working hard not to, and yet she was still attacked for it, but she was working hard not to express some of, just even a little bit of anger that she knows would have labeled her.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, Renee said it. It's an unwinnable position, particularly for Black women. And so she had to do it. And yet she will be attacked anyway. This was one of my frustrations with President Obama. Same thing, right? Of course, he had to bend over backwards to not be perceived as an angry, threatening Black man. And he did. I mean, it was his temperament anyway. And he was extraordinary, beyond reproach. What were the repercussions of that? Bit by bit, his legacy is dismantled. He's attacked anyway. He's accused anyway. This vicious white ring backlash rises up just at the very notion of him being in the White House. So the question is, what good does it do us to suppress our political anger? Again, I want to make the distinction between personal anger, and we have to take care of ourselves. And as Michael is saying, anger can be, and Audre Lorde said, your anger needs to be precisely focused. That's the key, because anger can consume. And as Michael said, anger is also a reaction of the other side that fuels that. But the only other one thing I wanted to point out to what Philip was saying is I want to make sure we have a historical context here, is that this anger is not new, right? I just taught David Walker's Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, written in 1839, in which he used anger as a motivating force to convince the enslaved people that they had nothing to lose but their chains, right? He used anger as a political tool. And so we have a long history of this. The Black radical tradition, and especially the Jeremiah tradition, is a virtuous anger leveled at the source of the oppression.
Mm-hmm. So since you mentioned President Obama, and we're talking about what it means to suppress that anger, let's take a look at Key and Peele. There's a comedy duo, former comedy duo, and this is a clip from their show where actors Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele introduce us to President Obama's anger translator.
Since being in office, we've created 3 million new jobs.
3 million new jobs.
We ended the war in Iraq.
Ended the war, y'all. We ended a war. Remember that?
These achievements should serve as a reminder that I am on your side.
I am not a Muslim.
And that my intentions as your president are coming from the right place.
They're coming from Hawaii, which is where I'm from, which is in the United States of America, y'all. Okay?
So that's a very comedic take, Renee, on what we understand that a lot of folks do every day. So in this instance, Luther, the anger translator, expressed what Obama would like to say, so the Key and Peele trio said. But that's a very serious, really articulation, though comedic.
You know, Black people are taught early to self-censor. You know, it's exactly what we see in that clip. It's this idea, you know what's happening inside you, but you also know the consequences of expressing that anger. And so you don't. I think in a way, anger can be really constructive, but it's also incredibly debilitating. It is hard to have your emotions devalued and that you don't have this right. We're sitting here talking about Black anger, and I'm going to wait to see how many discussions are had about white anger after a group of white men put together a plot to kidnap and kill the governor of Michigan. But we're not going to talk about that. Already there's they have a lot of economic problems. We have to consider that. There's all these ways to justify what white people, especially white men, do. But somehow a Black person who says, yeah, I really think it's wrong that the grand jury didn't come back with any real charges against the men who killed Breonna Taylor. Somehow you're angry. That's the thing. I mean, it's you almost need this anger translator, but you are your own anger translator, but you wait until you're home. You wait until you have safe spaces in which you can do that, because publicly it's always going to be used against you. And I always think about the quote from Zora Neale Hurston, that if you're silent about your pain, they will kill you and say you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You know? And that's what it always comes down to. If you say something, you're wrong. If you say nothing, well, you must be okay with it.
So, Philip, then what are the consequences of the particularly young people who seem to have said by their feet in the streets and by other organizing efforts against the systemic racism, and they've been very clear that it's systemic, what are the consequences for those folks who have expressed their political anger, and the anger that, the way that Kim has made clear, is a difference between personal and what we're talking about?
Well, it's a good question, and I think we have to look at their personal consequences, of course, where some of these kids are seen again as angry and therefore inconsolable, and some will view them as problematic. They don't see themselves that way. The effects in this sense is to keep on moving, to keep on pushing. If you compare their anger, of course, to the controlled anger of Obama, we oftentimes have wished Obama was less Hawaii, more Detroit, in terms of his outrage. And we also see another consequence, an official consequence of that anger, where you have the Justice Department trying to basically, and I'm talking about the Justice Department as opposed to the FBI, basically trying to bring charges against Black Lives Matter activists around the country for protesting, for being angry, not for the fires that are being set, but in some cases for simply demonstrating. Laws they're trying to pass laws in places like Tennessee to basically make it illegal to demonstrate, essentially to hold Black Lives Matter demonstrations. Meanwhile, you can, in fact, converge on the state capital of Michigan with weapons, and for that matter, New Hampshire with weapons, with pistols, with automatic rifles, so on and so forth. And that's considered somehow, within the purview, of course, of the Second Amendment. And that doesn't provoke the same type of anger. So the anger that we're seeing expressed by young people on the streets is being met with a traditional anger among many white Americans, but especially official America, especially the Justice Department under William Barr, taking the Black anger and turning it into something monstrous. And this monstrosity, they're trying to basically turn into something that can be enforced by law, and basically trying to criminalize many of these young people. Yeah. That's what we have to be aware of right now.
But yet, but Kim, and I don't have much time here, you make the point very strongly that despair is the opposite of anger, so that Black folk can't afford to lose the anger in this moment.
That's exactly right? Because anger is, Audre Lorde said, anger is information and energy. And the information that's contained in anger is that this is wrong and that I don't deserve it and that I don't accept it. And the opposite of that is acceptance. Maybe it's despairing acceptance or hopeless acceptance, but that's the opposite. So anger can be a motivating tool. And as I think it's in Wrinkle in Time, the character says, hold on to your anger, little Meg, you'll need it now, right? You will need your anger. So we have to hold on to our political anger, but focus it precisely towards the oppression and not back towards ourselves individually. And that's the other danger of swallowing your anger, is that you focus back to yourselves or to your family, right? That's what happens in Black communities and in all communities of oppression. So I don't think we should downgrade or downplay or deny our anger. I think we should hold on to it and focus it precisely.
All right. Well, I thank you very much for joining me tonight. That's the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. Thanks to all of our guests, and thank you for joining us. Stay with us as we continue our conversation on Facebook and Twitter, and please stay safe.